Thus have you prepared the land, drenching its furrows, breaking up its clods, softening it with showers, blessing its yields, says Psalm 65. You have crowned the year with your bounty and with abundant harvest. The fallow meadows overflow. The valleys are blanketed with flocks. They sing and shout for joy. Spring is here, even if we can't see it. And let the music of Gustav Mahler call us into its life. Rise as well as we sing a more conventional Easter song, Lo, the earth awakes again. I'm told that ancient peoples would light fires in winter to encourage the sun to come back. So maybe if we tell the earth to rise up and get warm, it will. But you have to sing loudly. So shall we join together in Lo, the earth awakes again, number 61 in your hymn book. Please be seated. I'd like you to join with me now in these words by Annie Dillard as a summons of hearts and minds to worship. The remarkable thing about the world of insects is that there is no veil cast over these horrors. These are mysteries performed in broad daylight before our very eyes. We can see every detail, and yet they are still mysteries. If, as Heraclitus suggests, God, like an oracle, neither declares nor hides, but sets forth by signs, then clearly I had better be descrying these signs. The earth devotes an overwhelming proportion of its energy to buzzings and leaves theirs is the biggest wedge of the pie. Why? We ought to keep a giant water bug in an aquarium so we can think about that. Yes, indeed. I'll be talking more about bugs and creepies and crawlies later. You feeling a little oogie already? But I am glad to welcome you here to Fountain Street Church, a center of liberal religion here in Grand Rapids for 149 years and a few extra months. We were organized as Fountain Street Baptist Church back in 1869 when two Baptist churches that couldn't get along decided that if the North and South could stop fighting, so could they. Which is really exactly what happened. And they bought a piece of property at this corner, put up a building, and within 30 years it had burned, and then they built this building, and it's been 90 or more years since we put this building up. And when I say we, I don't mean anybody in this room, but this community erected this building 90 years ago. And we've been worshiping in it ever since, under the watchful gaze of matters men and women, biblical and historical, and some would say hysterical. But this is a liberal church, which means we value the liberty of mind because that's how we free ourselves from the doctrines and dogmas, both of religion and assumption and other forms of internal slavery. And only if we do that can we grow our souls to the size they are destined to become large-hearted and bountifully thoughtful. And only then can we have that impact upon the world that we all wish, so that when we completed our lives, the world will have been glad we have been there. That's why we're here, to free our minds and grow our souls and change the world, because this is what we are here to do with the short, precious, and immensely wild life we all enjoy. So I'm glad you're here, whether you're here for the first time or the 477th. This is Fountain Street Church, and you belong here. So I'm going to change my pathway. I'm going to consider Psalms as I have all year long, but focus on a subject that crosses over several Psalms, in this case, animals. This month, we will observe probably the dearest tradition we have that's almost unique to us, Reverence for Life Sunday, which is 2 weeks from today. You are invited and encouraged to bring your favorite animal companion with you to church. And we will have a ritual of appreciation, and we will also have a blessing of the animals and lots of lovely music. And so I thought, let's talk about animals all month. They're around us all the time, and I'll be talking about the icky ones this morning. But I wanted you to know about that, and know that when I'm citing a psalm now, I'm not digging into one. I'm going to sample verses from several, because animals do turn up in the book of Psalms, often in a recitation or a reference to the Exodus story. As in the case of Psalm 105, in the middle of it, it says, "They performed his signs among them, his wonders against the land of Ham," referring to the land of Egypt. "He sent darkness. It was very dark. Did they not defy his word? He turned their waters into blood and killed their fish. Their land teemed with frogs, even the rooms of their king. Swarms of insects came at his command, lice throughout the country." Yesterday was the conclusion of the Passover observance, 8 days, in which the 10 plagues are recited in several ritual ways. I'll say more about that later, but lice was one of the plagues. And if you've ever had lice on you or your child's head, it is a plague. Willa Cather, one of the great authors of American early 20th century literature, in her wonderful book, My Antonia, has this passage about another creepy crawly. "I whirled around, and there on one of those dry gravel beds was the biggest snake I had ever seen. He was sunning himself after the cold night, and he must have been asleep when Antonia screamed. When I turned, he was lying in long, loose waves, like the letter W. He twitched and began to coil slowly. He was not merely a big snake. I thought he was a circus monstrosity. His abominable muscularity, his loathsome fluid motion somehow made me sick. He was as thick as my leg and looked as if millstones couldn't crush the disgusting vitality out of him." And then the naturalist Beryl Markham makes this observation. "It is amazing what a lot of insect life goes on under your nose when you have got it an inch from the earth. I suppose it goes on in any case, but if you are proceeding along on your stomach, dragging your body along by the fingernails, entomology presents itself very forcibly." So, Phil, was that a kind of a tango? Ah, wonderful. Astor Piazzolla, who is a great composer of tangos. I'm going to sit here because I need you to see my feet. See my feet? They're right there. They're at the end of my legs if you're trying to find them. Because on Good Friday, we have a service, and I went with the book of John this year and realized that the foot washing thing is a ceremony of very great importance that we don't observe very much. And so I did some foot washing. And it was deeply difficult and moving. Because most of the time we don't show off our feet in church, do we? There we go. Yeah, they're not so good. I've walked a lot of miles in these on these toes. I didn't show my feet off on Good Friday. But I thought, isn't it interesting how naked you feel with your shoes off? I can leave the rest of my clothes on and I still feel really exposed. And when I was washing someone else's feet, it was almost illicit. It was so close, to be so close to another person's body. However gently it was done, it was a very great gift to do that. And that's what prayer should feel like. A moment of closeness that feels precious. I guess one of the reasons I do so much prep for this part right here is so that you think about it rather than just go through the motions. Because it's dangerous to be close. Someone might bump you or bruise you or poke you or laugh at your feet. But if we don't get that kind of close, we never really do pray or worship. So I was at the Islamic community on Friday visiting my imam friends, and while you don't have to take off your socks, you do have to walk around without shoes, and plenty of people are there without socks on too. And I'm not asking you to do that. This room isn't built for it. But I'd like you to think for a moment about why we are so reluctant in our Western civilization to remove our shoes in front of others. Does it say something about an anxiety about being close to one another? We're awful fearful, aren't we? Let's be afraid together. Let's pray. Ancient of days, we enter this world with nothing on our bodies but our skin. And we leave the world much the same way. Is there not something precious about who we are without any adornment whatsoever? Even as the hair thins and the feet grow old and worn, there is some beauty hiding in that only if you get close to it can you see. Oh, well, how can we find the courage to be present to ourselves and others in our bare feet, in our bare hearts, with our bare lives? We wish to bare our souls, but fear that somehow we would be hurt. But is that not what we have to do? So we pause here, not to be close, but to promise to be closer at some moment this week that we might not have been willing to do. To put eyes upon eyes, to lay hand upon cheek, to put shoulder next to shoulder, to know the touch of skin to skin, of life to life. Help us to bear ourselves a little more that we may bear life more completely. Upon these things, we give ourselves now into that prayer which can only be known in the presence of silence. And so may it be. And the choir now will sing one of our most beloved and favored pieces. Come and bless us, won't you, choir? I lift up the names of those whose lives were completed at this time in years past. In their memory, we celebrate their gifts in this building, in this community, and that their names may never be entirely forgotten. We say them aloud from time to time. And in so doing, remember that we are but a stage and a place, not a destination. I lift up the names particularly of Edie McCarter, of Don Cranenberg Sr., and Bob Baumbach and Bert Smith, Gordon McCarty, Laura Gray, Russ Gray Jr., and Earl Clum, all of whom and others reached the end of their mortal span with us in this time in years past. And with that ancient prayer found in another tradition, I say, El Malay Rachamim, Shokin Racham Barachamim, God filled with mercy, dwelling in the heavens heights, bring proper rest beneath the wings of your Shekhinah to the souls of our beloveds and our blameless who went to their eternal place of rest. May you, who are a source of mercy, shelter them beneath your wings eternally. Bind their souls to we, the living, and to you, that they may rest in peace, that we may be at peace. And let us say, Ve'imru. Amen. So it took 10 plagues to turn Pharaoh around. That's what it takes to get a potentate to come down off of his potent place. Makes you wonder what will has to happen in our future, doesn't it? Among those 10 plagues are lice and flies. As I mentioned, Passover ended last night, and it began, and it is observed by reciting the story at a meal called a Seder. And they read from a story called the Haggadah, which means accounting. And the ritual calls for flicking a drop of wine onto your plate for each one of the plagues as they're recited one after the other. And no less than 4 involve those icky things: lice, flies, frogs, and locusts. You heard about the frogs earlier. Tzfardea, as they're called in Hebrew. That makes them sound nicer, doesn't it? It seems we humans have a long history of disgust about certain fellow creatures. This is something marvelously captured by Franz Kafka in that famous opening sentence to his story called The Metamorphosis. You may remember it. It starts very inconspicuously saying, Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from uneasy dreams and found himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic cockroach. Franz Kafka did not write typical stories. Feeling a little creepy? Yeah. Insects and vermin and snakes all seem to invoke an innate repulsion. Perhaps it is because they often hurt. Bees and wasps and scorpions really do sting. Flies and snakes really do bite. We lived in Texas for a few years back in the 90s, and we learned after only one experience not to go barefoot in the grass because that's where the fire ants live, and they don't like you treading upon their homes. We also learned, or I did, that you do not move rocks or logs or anything that is stationary without gloves and long sleeves, because scorpions do not like to be bothered either. And if you think a bee sting stings, just wait till a scorpion gets to you. Gee, that hurt. We learned later that there's a saying that if it bites, stings, burns, or itches, it lives in Texas. Every species of poisonous snake, the Gila monsters, and any other kind of nasty creature seems to thrive in the great state of Texas. But I think our revulsion is more than wariness around being bit or stung. Who hasn't been startled by a garter snake in the grass? They can't do an ounce of harm. What about the centipede in the bathtub? Ooh, but it won't hurt you, really. And you want to keep them around because they eat other bugs you don't like either. What about the skittering cockroach? They will never do you any personal harm, and yet we find them revolting. When we moved from Texas to Brooklyn, and we lifted up boxes in our garage that hadn't been moved in a few years, whole armies of cockroaches skittered across the floor, and we skittered back into the house really fast. In my research this week, I found this quip from the contemporary author Junot Diaz, who described the roaches that were so bold in his flat that turning on the lights did not startle them. They waved their 3-inch antennae as if to say, "Hey, puto, turn that thing off." The word thing, by the way, is not the one he wrote, but it's church. This month I am, in fact, combining two things, my continued exploration of the book of Psalms and our interest, devotion to animals. Character School is looking into that, and we're going to have Reverence for Life Sunday. And so I dug around a lot. We like our reverence for life experience, and we should. It's a wonderful observance in which we bless our animal friends and acknowledge the importance of the earth on Earth Day, which happens to be a Sunday this year. Be there. Bring your animal friend. We can't wait to see you all. And if you're not an animal-loving person, the balcony is a great place for you to be, to enjoy from a distance what you don't have in person. So, I looked up animals in the Psalter, and I found a number of different verses, some of them having to do with Exodus, like I pointed out, but not entirely. Psalm 118, the psalm from which that famous verse, "This is the day which the Lord has made," also includes a verse that writes, all nations have beset me, they surround me, they beset me like bees. Ever been chased by a bunch of bees? No place you want to be for long. In Psalm 78, it says, "He inflicted upon them swarms of insects," and of course frogs. There's another reference to Exodus. In Psalm 109, it says, "For I am poor and needy, and my heart is pierced within me. I fade away like a lengthening shadow. I am shaken off like locusts." In other words, flicked away. In Psalm 22, which we've already read, "But I am a worm, less than human, scorned by men, despised by people." How many of you enjoy worms except at the end of a fishhook? Psalm 49, "Death will give them their food like sheep. The underworld is their fate, and they will go down to it. Their flesh is food for worms. Their form is wasted away." Psalm 58, "The wicked are defiant from birth. The liars go astray from the womb. Their venom is like that of a snake, a deaf viper that stops its ears." In Psalm 91, it says, "You will tread on cubs and vipers. You will trample lions and asps." So all these icky creatures are icky pretty much since the days of the Bible. But of course, the most famous creepy crawl is not in the book of Psalms at all. It's in the very first verses of Genesis, the serpent. But it bears reminding a few things we forget about that story. That the serpent was not, in fact, Satan, according to the story, but merely the most subtle of the creatures in the garden. And that it had limbs, because only afterward was it robbed of its limbs. In the great poem, Paradise Lost, John Milton lifts up the idea that Satan was the serpent, and in that very long poem, Satan, having accomplished this, goes back to hell, to his palace, which is called Pandemonium, all demons, to tell his minions what he had done. And this is what he said. "So having said that, while he stood expecting their universal shout and high applause to fill his ear, when, contrary, he hears on all sides from innumerable tongues a dismal universal hiss, the sound of public scorn, he wondered, but not long had leisure, wondering at himself now more. His visage felt drawn to sharp and spare. His arms clung to his ribs. His legs entwined each other till supplanted. Down he fell, a monstrous serpent on his belly, prone, reluctant but in vain. A greater power now ruled him. Punished in the shape he sinned, according to his doom. He would have spoke, but hiss for hiss returned with forked tongue to forked tongue, for now all were transformed alike to serpents as accessories to his bold riot. Dreadful was the din of hissing through the hall, thick swarming now with complicated monsters, head and tail, scorpion and asp. And so Milton paints this picture of all the demons of hell all turned into serpents and bugs, writhing about in the underworld. Feeling creepy now? You're supposed to. It's a little bit like Antonia's encounter with that giant snake, the sense of its muscular disgust writhing all about. Anyone ever seen that wonderful statue in the Vatican Museum of Laocoon? Showing an ancient story of an old man and his two sons wrestling a snake and failing because the snake is so large, it is squeezing all three of them to death. It's a great statue. It's a creepy story. I want you to think about that for just a second, because there's another story I'm going to tell now that tells a different version, not of that story, but of what creepy crawlies are about. Now, Easter, of course, is the main thing in the Christian tradition, but the story doesn't stop there. If you read the book of Luke, for example, there's a volume 2. It's called the Acts of the Apostles, and it's to explain what happened after Jesus came back from the dead and ascended into heaven. And it's the story of the apostles, obviously, and the formation of the new Christian community. And, of course, we all know that the chief apostle is Mr. Peter. Now, in the book of Acts, in the chapter 10, he gets a message from a Roman centurion to come and visit him. He's not going to go. Why? First of all, that's the occupying army. Second of all, he's a Gentile. Third, Peter is a Jew. You don't mix. But then he had a dream. And that's what's in the Bible. About noon the next day, Peter went up on the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat. While it was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw heaven opened and something like a large sheet coming down, lowered to the ground by its four corners. In it were all kinds of four-footed creatures and reptiles and birds of the air. And then he heard a voice saying, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "No, by no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is profane or unclean." The voice said to him again a second time, "What God has made clean, you must not call profane." This happened 3 times, and the thing was suddenly taken into heaven. Now, this is interpreted appropriately as a story that tells Peter that what has been forbidden no longer is. But we have to go beyond that, because I want you to imagine Peter's encounter. He's a good Jew. He doesn't eat anything that isn't allowed. And everything in that tent, in that canopy was profane, treif, non-kosher, disgusting. Think pigs, giraffes, snakes, scorpions, bugs, things you wouldn't eat. And so when Peter is disgusted, he really is feeling quite disgusted. And so God is saying, "Go ahead, eat the bugs. They're good for you." And say, "No, I can't do that." We've all had this experience, at least at some level. I can tell you a little bit about mine. So I'm in Peru a couple of years ago, stopping at a restaurant, and there's a cute little terrarium there filled with guinea pigs squeaking beautifully. Squeak, 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 squeak. And I remembered, they're not pets. Because like the restaurant in China with the fish that you point at and they kill, those guinea pigs were for supper. And we're disgusted by that. Ooh, it's awful. But yet, I was only too happy to point to that trout in China and have it slid open and made into my meal. What makes the difference between them for us? If I were to tell you that some cultures eat dogs, you would be horrified. If I were to tell you every pig you eat is smarter than any dog you own, I'm telling you the truth. So why do we eat one and not the other? Why do we eat either one of them, for that matter? Personally, I hate slithery bugs, but I can live quite contentedly with spiders. I get along well with snakes, but things with lots of legs just bother me a lot. On the other hand, if it lives in the sea and we call it a lobster or a crab or a shrimp, which is nothing but an insect that lives underwater, I think it's delicious, don't you? And I can think of nothing more succulent than opening up a live oyster and plopping it down my gullet. So clearly, our sense of what is disgusting and what is not is entirely arbitrary. Michael Pollan wrote a book called The Omnivore's Dilemma, and that's the point. How do we know what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad, when we will eat just about anything? In fact, the people in northern China think of all the people in the southern China as having no, shall we say, no sense whatsoever, because they will eat anything. Like I said, in a couple of weeks, we'll be bringing our animal friends to church. And while it's a bit chaotic, the atmosphere is always a little more cheerful than it is on every other Sunday. And I began to wonder about that. And I realized people are actually nicer when their animals are around. And I wonder, whether or not that's a universal phenomenon. We all love to pet our dogs, to have our cats tease us a little bit. We just seem to be more humane when we're around non-humans. Am I right? And it dawned on me, I know how to fix our government. We should be sending cats and dogs to Congress and have them around a little. Wouldn't it be wonderful if Paul Ryan had to watch out for his gavel if the cat were trying to bat it at the same time? Wouldn't it be fantastic if the only way you could talk in the Senate was to hold a Shih Tzu in your arms at the same time? We would have such nicer people doing much nicer things. Just imagine a guinea pig here, a rabbit there, maybe a parakeet or two. Lord knows that they would sing a better song than some of the folks that are there now. And maybe a couple of those crickets in those cute little cages. And I don't know, maybe a couple of geckos licking their eyes from time to time. See, you're smiling at the very thought of it. It makes all the sense in the world, doesn't it? Because, as I just said, animals make us more human in the better sense of the word. Clearly, we are less ourselves when we are separated from the animals around us. And now think of how we live. Now think of how we are unhappy when animals come into our space when we so need them in our lives. I don't keep a pet, partly because I'm not good at caring for an animal. And I think an animal deserves more respect than I can give it. We're out of the house too often. But I appreciate that those who do and do it very seriously. Whether you keep an animal companion or not, you know that it makes you a better person. It gives you a gladness in your being that no human can give you. We literally cannot survive without them, not just emotionally. And that's where the icky crawlies come in, because they're the ones who make sure the earth is ready for us. Because if it weren't for the worms, there would be no dirt. And if there weren't no dirt, there would be no food, and we would not be here. And if you don't like the spiders, remember, they're eating all the mosquitoes that you don't want biting you. In fact, they take care of us in ways that we do not know. We may never cease to be startled by the creepy, crawly things, the slithering, writhing snakes, and the slimy worms. But I have a funny feeling when they see us, they're even more grossed out, and even we look a little more monstrous to them. And then we're back to Peter again, because that's a euphemism in that dream of how all the people on the world really do live in the same place, that we're all, despite our variety of peoples and languages and cultures, we're all still in the same four-cornered canopy, suspended for I don't know how long, and like it or not, we're all in this together. So the next time a silverfish crawls along the floor and you want to go, ah, and run away, remember, it would rather you not be there at all. Or if a spider sets up shop in a corner of your house, give it a little time. It's doing more good than you know. And when that fly harasses you and you're tempted to swat it, take a breath. And remember this, you share over 50% of your DNA with every insect on the planet. They're kin, people. You are more related to them than to some of the humans you know. And to some extent, we're all better off. So remember that you share more DNA with them than with most people. And remember also that you share 99.9% of your DNA with the president. And tell me who you'd rather hang out with at this point. So think about that. Whatever is creepy or crawly, it may be we who are doing the creeping and the crawling. And perhaps we would do well to wait a minute and appreciate the spiders and snakes who are making the world safe for us. That's all I have for you today. I hope the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart are found true in thy sight, thou who art my rock and my redeemer. And let us lift our voices in song with a wonderful tune that is sometimes sung by the choir. I'm looking for the number, I think it's number 79. It's all about nature. It's a long tune, so you'll have to breathe a few times, but I'm really looking forward to it because we don't sing this one very often. It's called No Number Tallies Nature Up. Text by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Phil, could you help us out by running through it? Help us to be always hopeful gardeners of the Spirit who know that without darkness nothing comes to birth, as without light nothing flowers. May we have faith in life to do wise planting, that the generations to come may reap even more abundantly than we. And may we be bold in bringing to fruition the golden dream of human kinship and justice. This we ask, that the broken fields of promise become harvest fields of reality, knowing that this day and every day is the day which the Lord has made, and let us ever rejoice and be glad in it. Amen and amen.
Be like the